From the NewsChannel 5 network, this is Inside Politics.
Hello, everyone. I'm NewsChannel 5's political analyst, Pat Nolan. Welcome to Inside Politics. As we approach the end of 2017 and anticipate the beginning of a very active political and election year in 2018, we welcome Linda Peek Schacht from Lipscomb University back to the show. Linda is a leader in residence at Lipscomb and is involved with the Nelson Andrews Leadership Institute, Nelson and Sue Andrews Leadership Institute, I should say. Linda, you're always very kind to come on the show. Thanks for coming back on again today.
Thank you, and happy birthday this week.
Well, thank you. Let's begin with the special U.S. Senate race that was held down in election that was held down in Alabama this week. Are you surprised, like many people were, that a Democrat can win in a deep red state in the South like Alabama?
Well, I was surprised. I had predicted that Roy Moore would win, and I am so glad that Alabama surprised me. But I think we have to look at the coalition that was put together there and how it is the same as what was put together in Virginia, and that is African American voters, soccer moms, millennials, and the labor, which is very strong in Alabama. So perhaps what happened in Alabama was not unique and not a one-off because of what happened with Roy Moore being such a controversial candidate before the sexual harassment and assault charges ever came up. Well, that's right. I don't think the Democrats can count on a Roy Moore-like candidate in other states. But if we look at what's been happening around the country, we do see that what Doug Jones put together is a coalition that can win even in a conservative state that went for Donald Trump.
So you think it could be duplicated here in Tennessee? We'll talk more about the U.S. Senate race here for Bob Corker's vacant seat, but you think it's possible for it to be replicated inside the volunteer?
Well, I do, because I think that Governor Bredesen has had a history of being able to put together Republicans and Republicans as well as the Democratic coalition of African American voters, women, and young people.
Democrats don't have a great record of turning out their base, particularly in off non-presidential years. So what happened both here and in Virginia back in November?
Well, that's what makes Alabama so amazing, because you heard early on that Doug Jones might not be activating the African American vote, but instead what we saw, it was even higher than when Barack Obama was on the ticket. And that, I think, is because of the resist movement and the fact that African Americans really have reacted very strongly to President Trump's comments and actions in their community.
The African American vote, I think, total in the turnout in Alabama was 30%, and the percentage that Jones got was 96%. That's even higher than numbers Barack Obama got the two
That's
times
exactly
he ran
right.
in that state. So what happened there? What particular? I think you mentioned some of the reasons that were motivated, but that doesn't always get the African American vote to the polls.
Well, number one, he had a better ground game than anybody thought, but he also brought in, look at who he brought in, Cory Booker, who was there, Charles Barkley, probably more important than Cory Booker in that last rally, and Deval Patrick, the former governor of Massachusetts, all of whom are great campaigners and who helped mobilize that base.
But given all of it, it was still a 20,000 vote victory over 1.2+ million votes cast. Pretty narrow. I mean, the Democrats could have been just on the other side of that.
That's exactly
and been very
right.
disappointed.
That's exactly
right. Is it possible the Democrats will overplay this or overthink this and think this? Look at this. We're in
well,
the money
they can
again.
overplay Alabama if they, and I also think they are not overplaying Virginia. So they need to look at how is Alabama like Virginia, but how is it different. The other thing I think is in Alabama and in Virginia, we had centrist candidates. Not the Bernie Sanders wing of the party. These were centrist candidates that were running. We also had candidates who were focused on issues that were important to the region. For instance, the young man who won, whose girlfriend was shot on camera down in southern Virginia, ran on the opioid crisis. And the transgender woman who won in Manassas ran on traffic. The Democrats have to recognize that. Centrist candidates focused on issues that matter to people.
A lot of people thought that Jones was going to have a problem because he was pro-choice, and if you looked at some of the exit polls beforehand, it looked like when they asked should abortion be legal or illegal, it was a double-digit margin that it should be illegal.
That's right.
Yet somehow, if that was in true the makeup of the electorate that went to the polls, he won.
Well, what it means is that for some people in the evangelical base and for some conservatives, that they are not one-issue voters. But there is a very strong evangelical base across the country for whom abortion is the litmus test.
It was definitely not a good week for the Senate Republican leadership. They somewhat relieved they don't have to now do an ethics investigation, which they were talking about doing had Moore got elected. They don't have to worry about trying to expel him from office, which they'd also talked about doing, which would have been difficult right after the election to do that. But on the other hand, their majority in the Senate, particularly next year, is going to be down to just a margin for one, no more than two, and they lose any legislation going in there. So it's a difficult time up there, and raising questions again about how well they're going to be able to hold not only their margins in the Senate, but in the House next year.
Well, that's right. I mean, Democrats are very excited about the potential of taking back the House and even the Senate.
That's tough for the Senate because the Democrats have so many
seats up,
and
that's right.
seats in states that Donald Trump won in 2016.
That's right. But from the Republican side, I think one reason that President Trump called Doug Jones so quickly and said he wanted him to work with him is because they know that somebody from a conservative state like that, even a Democrat who wins in a conservative state, may be someone they can pick off.
The president was interesting because his first tweet right after the election was very conciliatory, even congratulated Jones for winning the election. Some people wondered if he actually wrote that particular tweet. But his second one was more, well, he didn't think Roy Moore was going to win in the first place. That was kind of hard to figure that out when you heard what he said leading up to the election.
Well, it was revisionist history, but we're used to that from the president, and especially in his tweets. I think the interesting thing is the way that the White House and the Republicans moved to fill the airwaves with other things this week.
Linda Peek Schacht, our guest from Lipscomb University, back to continue our conversation about what's going on at the end of 2017 in politics and what looks ahead in 2018, which is going to be a big midterm election year. Back after this break.